Hey gang, your old buddy Platt here, and today I want to talk about home brewing and sugar, the addition of sugar into making beer, wine, what have you. Where I want to kind of approach it from is the difference of table grapes and wine grapes. I've had several videos where I've taken store-bought grape juice and added sugar to make some kind of variation on wine or whatever. And one of the comments I inevitably get is like, wow, there's so much sugar in grape juice, why would you add more sugar? Or, diabetes, you're showing people how to get diabetes, or there's too much sugar. Calm down. The sugar that I add is not meant for you to consume, it's meant for the yeast to consume. Let's start off first with talking about the difference between table grapes and wine grapes. Table grapes are what used to make that grape juice you buy in the store. Table grapes are bigger grapes. They have a thicker pulp. They have thinner skin. They have kind of a crunch to it. That's kind of why people like to eat them. It's just the mouthfeel. They also tend to hold up better in transport. They're just a sturdier grape physically. But for our purpose and for producing homemade wine, whatever, they have less sugar and less acid. And that is important to us. Wine grapes tend to be smaller grapes. They have less of that pulp. They have a thicker skin. They tend to be a little more fragile. If you were to hold them, they'd easily kind of fall apart on you. Some of them have what's called slip skin, where literally you just kind of pinch the grape and the skin comes off. But again, as far as our purpose is going, wine grapes have more sugar and more acid. Now, when I've done a couple of these videos, everybody notices the sugar, but they don't talk about the acid part. And again, it's all about balance. In my video where I made homemade port wine, but besides adding sugar, I also added an acid blend that you can find at a homebrew shop, again, to kind of bring balance. A good way to look at it is from the winemaker's perspective. They use a term called Brix. It's just a measurement of how much sugar is in that juice or that solution, what have you. Table grapes tend to run 17 to 19 on the Brix scale, where wine grapes, the juice from wine grapes, tend to run from 24 to 26. So wine grapes have anywhere from a quarter to a third more sugar in their juice than table grapes. So if I'm making a wine with table grape juice, and I'm trying to replicate that wine grape juice, I have to add acid and sugar. And I'm adding that, again, for the yeast to use. I'm trying to bring it back up to balance. I'm not making it just ridiculously sweet for my own personal reasons. To compare it to home brewing, if you've seen several of my home brewing videos where I do a kit, I talk about, I do specific gravity measurements. You use a hydrometer. And what that specific gravity is measuring, especially if you do what's called an original gravity before you ferment and then you do one after you ferment, it kind of tells you the potential or the amount of fermentable sugars in that liquid, or in beer it's called a wort. And you do a measurement before fermentation and afterwards, and you take the difference of those two readings, and it tells you A, how well the yeast did fermenting those sugars, but B, it also helps you figure out your alcohol by volume. Now, in a couple of the videos I did where I've taken store-bought grape juice and added sugar, or like I did recently, not too long ago, I reviewed a wine kit where we made a Pinot Noir, but even in that video, even though I bought Pinot Noir concentrate, which was made from real wine grapes, I still added sugar because it was just a little bit of juice compared to the 2.5 gallons I believe I made, what have you. The original gravity on that was 1.080. When I made my homemade port wine, the base wine, its original gravity was 1.080. My most popular video on the channel is something called Simplest Way to Make Booze. I've basically made a glorified homemade wine, hooch, some people call it prison wine. And again, I added sugar to store-bought grape juice. The original gravity on that was 1.095. So with those readings, let's compare that now to some classic beer styles. People don't think about sugar in beer, what's going on during the mash is that we're converting the starches in those grains into sugars for that yeast. And so let's compare the gravity readings to some classic beer styles. A Bock beer from Germany, starting gravities around 1.075. There's a style called a Doppelbock, which literally translates into a double bock. It's a higher ABV version, basically. Starting gravity around 1.082. If you like some really the big high ABV beer, something like a Russian Imperial Stout, your starting gravity is going to be around 1.105. Some of the Belgian strong ales, your Duvels, your Golden Drac, Schwarber, you're looking at 1.115 starting gravity. So even though you don't think about sugar in beer, because beer they add hops for balance, kind of like in wine we have acid, it's there in beer. Now, you normally don't add just straight sugar into beer because, again, we just add more grain into it. There are times where you might add a molasses, a honey. There are the Belgian beers add something called Belgian candy sugar or whatever. But again, it gets done in beer too. We just don't think about it in that sense. Getting back to the grapes, that bottle of really dark purple grape juice that you buy at the store most likely come from Concord grapes. It's the most popular quote-unquote table grape here in the U.S., even though it's primarily used for juice. There's also Niagara grapes, Catawba grapes. Those grapes had been used in the past to make wine because they were native grapes to North America, but today you really don't see a lot of wine from those grapes, and again, there's other uses for them. The wines that you go to the store and buy, your Cabernets, your Merlots, your Pinot Noirs, those are all classic wine grapes. The Concords, the Niagaras, those come from the family Vitis Lambrusco, which again was native here to North America. Wine grapes, Cab, Merlot, what have you, are Vitis vinifera. They're just two different species of grapes, and Vitis vinifera has literally been bred now for hundreds of years to produce wine. So again, if I want to use table grapes to produce a wine, I have to adjust, and that includes adding sugar. If you are still concerned about sugar and again diabetes and stuff, and it's totally understandable, something to talk to your doctor about. They will let you know what you can and can't consume, how much sugar, or if they want you even drinking alcohol at all, which if this is that big of an issue, I'd probably advise you not to consume anything we make on this channel because it's all alcohol based, what have you. To kind of wrap up this video, I'm going to leave a link down below to a video. I believe the channel is the Sci Guys. They do kind of home-based scientific little experiments, what have you. And they did an experiment with yeast to talk about fermentation. And what they did was they took 4 bottles. They added a little bit of yeast to the bottom of the bottles, then added about a cup or so of water, shook them all up to blend in the yeast. Then in the first bottle they left alone. The second bottle they added 1 teaspoon of sugar. The third bottle 2 teaspoons of sugar, and that fourth bottle 3 teaspoons of sugar. Then they put a balloon on top to see the reaction. When yeast gets it going, it will produce alcohol, but also CO2 gas as part of the process. Well, that first bottle, because there was no sugar in with the yeast, nothing happened. The yeast never got started. No reaction. The next 3, because it had sugar, there was a reaction, CO2 was created, and that balloon filled up. But what you notice on that is as more sugar, progressively got more sugar in the bottles, those bottles, the balloon got progressively bigger. There's more CO2 being produced. Now, what does this experiment tell us? It tells us, A, sugar has to have yeast to even get started. But once you get it started, it can take more sugar to produce more of an output. So if you add additional sugar, the yeast will take care of it. And where that works for us is, again, yes, grape juice has sugar, and some people may say a lot of sugar. But if I add additional sugar, again, that's not for you to consume, that's for that yeast, and that yeast will take that additional sugar and turn into alcohol and CO2. Now, at what point is it too much sugar? Is it that 4th teaspoon of sugar, or is it a cup of sugar? Don't know, and I'm not a scientist. There is a point where, again, it gets too much for the yeast to handle, or that the yeast creates so much alcohol from all that extra sugar that it gets to be a too alcoholic environment for the yeast to live. But again, that yeast takes that extra sugar. So again, I'm not trying to get anybody diabetes. I'm trying to make an alcoholic beverage. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Please like the video also, because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comment section, or you can contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.